Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Abstract Apes. And today we're talking about existentialism, which is a philosophical movement which developed in the 20th century. We're going to talk about a couple of philosophers, the main ones being Albert Camus, Sartre. We're going to include also Viktor Frankl. Look at a range of works that me and Penef ourselves have enjoyed, but we also like to analyze them, critique them, and see what we can get from them. And
Yeah, well, existentialism a bit more contemporary movement than the ones we've kind of looked into in the past. We've looked a lot in ancient Greece and stuff like that, philosophy of the ancient times. But now we're jumping over into existentialism. We're skipping the whole Enlightenment period, basically. But I feel like it's really, really exciting to talk about. And even though we might not know that much about it, we've read a couple of books and seen a couple of lectures. And by no means are we trying to educate here, like anyone. We're just super eager to talk about this because it's a very different take on philosophy. And I just really want to talk about this with you.
yeah, it's part of like this continental movement, which is different from, let's say, the modern analytic philosophical
Yeah,
movement, and it's quite esoteric. I would say lots of the concepts are, um, you can say they are abstract, but in another way they are tangible to our own experience. So lots
yeah,
of
I
interesting
definitely think
stuff.
so.
This is the main reason why we want to do this episode, is because the ideas are just very fruitful, very interesting. Sometimes they can take a dark turn. We're gonna see later on
Yeah.
how, but I'm just really interested in the feeling that you get from reading these works and indulging in this philosophy.
Yeah, do you want to start off by saying kind of like key concepts and ideas of existentialism, just to like introduce the viewers?
Yeah, so in essence, we have a couple of concepts here drafted, and we talked about human purpose in a subjective manner. That's being rejected by the existentialists. So there's no such thing as meaning. There's no such thing as an ultimate purpose. So what you're left with, what you see in this existential movement, is you're left with a feeling of kind of meaninglessness. You try to to manufacture your own meaning, your own purpose, and that's something very common in a lot of the works.
Yeah, I definitely think the whole movement is kind of centered around the subjects, so our own experiences. They kind of move away from the attempt of philosophy to kind of make a framework out of everything. They abandon all systems. Basically, existentialists are basically people that don't follow systems, or at least that's how I understand it. So they say, you know what? There's no objective moral code. There's only free will. They really well, most of them, I think, believe in free will. They say the human subject is free to do whatever they deem uh, like worthy, basically, like valuable, and that's exactly what they're going to be living their life, um, like according to,
Yeah,
basically.
and the free will is a very very central concept. I got that from Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. If you remember, that was our first episode that we even attempted to record during summer. It was during lockdown actually. Yeah,
Yeah.
and because both of us were fascinated by Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning and its depth, right? And there he centers the work around the idea of free will. So people do have a choice. They can, let's say, make their own path, make their own choices, and that's how you should approach every time you're in a turning point in your life, or you might have some struggles. You should take responsibility for that and make the those right choices.
Exactly. I think that's what it's all about, moral responsibility, taking responsibility for your own actions. And these philosophers really try to live this moral heroism life, basically. It kind of reminds me of Marcus Aurelius, but Marcus Aurelius obviously is following Stoic ideals. It's kind of a more objective movement. He's kind of trying to say, well, everyone should act like me. But these existentialists are like, no, you know what? We're just gonna like try to find our own way, and that's it, because there's no point anyway.
Yes, it's
Or
more
that's how I
it's
understand
more
it.
heroism in the face of meaninglessness, in the face
Yeah.
of the absurd. So I think we can touch upon
Yeah, I
Camus,
think, yeah.
which
Yeah, okay.
his philosophy is called Absurdism, and we've both enjoyed reading The Stranger. I know you're also reading The Myth of Sisyphus now. And for the viewers, just briefly, The Myth of Sisyphus, which was popularized, or the version of The Myth of Sisyphus, which was popularized by Camus, is basically the idea of a person who is pushing a rock up a hill, only for that rock to fall down again, and him being punished to do it over and over and over again. So Camus, in the face of this absurd, which he imagines life to be exactly that, pushing a rock up a hill, doesn't have a purpose whatsoever. The question that he asks is, how should we face that absurd reality of just going nowhere with every action that we have? Just the fact that this question exists, there's the fact that he formulated this question, to me is fascinating, and also the solution to his problem is also very, people might say it's a kind of a dark turn, right, to be faced with this absurd reality, living it day to day. But the solution that he gives, what I got from his work, is that you should do the things that make sense to you, in a way manufacture that meaning, because everything around you is meaningless anyway. It doesn't make sense. It can only make sense to you.
Right. So I think Sisyphus is a really good metaphor, obviously. But I want to ask you, how do you perceive the absurd in that metaphor? What is, you talk about fabricating meaning and stuff like that. What do you think Sisyphus is feeling kind of fulfilled about? What is his meaning?
So what gives him fulfillment? So
Yeah.
Camus says one should imagine Sisyphus happy, but the question is, what does make Sisyphus happy?
Exactly.
I think
What is it
moral
that
heroism
you find?
is a good answer to that. I feel like doing things despite the fact that it might be absurd, so you still take up that responsibility and you struggle through life despite of it, so you, in a way, you never give up. I think that idea is quite well suited for this metaphor. So what makes Sisyphus fulfilled? Well, I don't think that Sisyphus can be truly happy in the sense of like being truly fulfilled, but what he does is he does struggle against the meaninglessness of life, and that gives him meaning.
Yeah, I think that really embodies what Camus tries to put forward with absurdism. It's like rebel against that very meaninglessness.
Yeah. And also Viktor Frankl's, we both read, what happened in those concentration camps, his account of what he saw, because he was an
Holocaust survivor.
Yeah, he was a Holocaust survivor and went to the actual camps. So he said that the most people that were most likely to survive the camps and to get out of them and to continue on their lives were people who attached some kind of meaning to their life. For example, they were looking forward to seeing their family or writing that book they always postponed writing. And in a way, what they've done is, like Sisyphus, they've manufactured a kind of goal or a kind of meaning so that they continue on pushing that rock up the hill.
Yeah.
And never give up.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a really good introduction to absurdism. But apparently, it's only a part of existentialism, and there's like a couple more people.
And even though, it's not even a part, because Camus rejected the term, right? So
but he kind of falls in
fits,
there.
Yeah, it fits quite well.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah. Anyway, so do you want to talk about Kierkegaard and like Nietzsche? I think those are the two people that kind of started this whole thing. They kind of dismantled the belief in reason.
Yeah, the predecessors of this existential thought.
Yeah, exactly.
Existential
so I know you like the Enlightenment thinkers.
Very much so.
And this belief in reason. So do you think reason is truthful? Do you think we can trust reason to guide us in life?
Yes,
because
I think reason is the the prime way that we even conduct conversations, right? So we believe that through conversations we can get to somewhere, and we use reason for that. You object to that? Not really convinced? Well, let's use some reason to try and see why you're not convinced. What I mean is that I think reason is central to everything that we do. That's the primary tool that we use. And I think one criticism of reason, rationality, and the Enlightenment ideals is that reason is not everything. Rationality is not everything. It's not a perfect tool. But then again, every time I've tried to ask myself, what else is there? What else can I rely on? I don't have an answer to that. I haven't found it. So that's why I'm so attached to this idea of reason. It just sticks and can't seem to get out of it.
It sounds to me almost like religious belief in reason.
Yeah,
you've taken that leap of faith. You see that you see that it has vulnerabilities. You see that it's not a perfect system, and you still believe in it. And Christians kind of do the same thing. It's just they're a bit more extreme, and like religious people in general. What I think though is, instead of looking outward to find this meaning, because we already know if there is no God and we have no idea of knowing, then this world might just be meaningless. And that's like easier to prove than proving that there is a God. So if it's easier to prove that the world is meaningless, why are you looking outward to find meaning? Why are you looking objectively on the matter, like trying to find reason, trying to have conversations with people and stuff like that? We know the limits of language. We know that our really sophisticated ideas can't be explained with languages. What I think is we should look inwards, just like the existentialists do. We should look how our subjective experience and how we exist in this world to see what we can make of it. Rather than looking outward to make sense of things, look inward to make sense.
I see, yeah. And I think the reason why I'm grounded in this idea of reason, this outward idea, maybe like a Platonist who's grounded in this ideal, much like a Christian person is grounded in another ideal, is that I believe in this idea of objective truth. You know, I'm very scientifically minded, and so to me there is an external reality which is objective. We do have a subjective experience, of course, and we are subjects in the end of the day, but I believe there are commonalities, there are some things that are universal, which is why we can do science in the first place. I don't think we would be able to do physics if the universe was subjective purely, because you couldn't ask the questions of what is the world like and get an answer to that, because it depends on who you're asking, right?
Right. But do you think that has quite the relationship of meaning and kind of this phenomenology vibe that you're giving it? Because I think what you're explaining here is these two terms are not opposite to each other. We can still look at our experiences in an objective manner, like phenomena, basically, phenomenology. So we can see our emotions, we can see our experience, and still examine it in a scientific way. I'm not saying we can't do that.
So are you referring more to like a Buddhist approach to experience, which is just to ask yourself what you're feeling, to observe what's going on inside of you?
What kind of I'm trying to say is not to think that everything is subjective and that we're kind of like creating this world or whatever. Still, you can still believe in science and cling on to that, that science is a really useful tool. And we can examine ourselves with science and we can see what we think and stuff like that. But what truly matters is how we cope with life, how we deal with the question of existence.
Yeah, sounds to me like
the ultimate questions.
Approach. So instead of asking, what is reality, what is objective, the pragmatic approach is how to deal with life, how to live accordingly, or how to live a good life. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, kind of. But I just think that reason has its limitations, and that's the limitations that it kind of it kind of has, because We as humans are not reasonable creatures. We are very emotional. We're very intuitive. We like to believe in irrational stuff. We like to hope. Even our hope in reason is irrational itself.
That's a good point. Yeah, the fact that we aren't just pure robots and pure mathematicians and logicians. So I think what the logical positivists, for example, got wrong is the fact that some things are undermined by emotion, because fundamentally we are emotion, and you can see the slide between these movements of pure rationality and pure emotions, such as the Enlightenment movement, followed by the anti-Enlightenment or Romantic period, where you can see the focus emotion. So
exactly.
Yeah. So are you referring to some kind of balance between emotion and reason?
Yeah, I genuinely think reason is kind of what Nietzsche said, like will to power. I think reason is a super useful tool. It's probably in nature, at least, like from an evolutionary standpoint, it is the most useful tool we can get. We evolved to be reasonable, to have this very high plane of consciousness, and that's our best tool. That's our best power. You know, cheetahs are super fast, but they got limited by gravitational laws and like biological laws and stuff like that. But reason, it kind of improves itself exponentially. You become smarter, and that makes you learn faster, and that kind of makes you even more
that's
smarter.
The question that I want to ask is, if reason is just a tool like any other tool, then there's not really anything special about it. And I think but I think there is. I think reason and rationality are the reason why we've grounded ourselves into them is not because of a practical reason, but because they tell us how reality really is. They're a way to get to the truth. And the truth exists. It's not like it's floating.
What do you exactly mean by that? How do you get to reality through reason?
Well,
if everything goes through your subjective...
Through science and reason, right? And the way science works is through observing patterns and then testing hypotheses, and that's the scientific method. And the scientific method is reasonable. Now, we can just go back, and what is actually reason and examine.
You're kind of like trying to say that reason is reasonable, which is a truism. Yes, of course. if you're trying to prove reason with reason, you'll always be successful, because you're not leaving that framework of reason.
And here's another thing. I can't give you an argument to why I'm right. That's not reasonable. And that's what you're doing on your end too. You're trying to dig in through reason and trying to think through, using your reason through a problem you might be thinking.
So you're saying is I am utilizing reason to deconstruct reason.
Yes, and I'm using reason to prove it. To prove reason.
Okay, and that's where it comes. But we both have beliefs. We also have that second thing, that intuitive thing. And your intuitive thing is saying, believe in reason. My intuitive thing is saying, don't believe in reason. and that's what I mean. We are all have two kind of senses in ourselves. One is the reason, one is the second system, the very mathematical, analytical system. And the first one is saying, what was his name? Daniel Kahneman. That's his kind of thing.
Fast and slow. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but the first system is the intuitive system, is what we feel. And there are philosophers that kind of say, that should be one thing.
But then I think the natural...
When we think about life,
the natural
there's a balance.
procession is to ask, for example, why you hold the belief that reason is not true or not useful, and I hold the belief that reason is useful or is the right way to go. And when we ask, the next question is, why do you think that way? Or why do I think that way? Let's try and sort it out. Here's a difference. Let's try and look into it and see who has the better idea. And the way we get to that better idea, to see which is true, which is false, is through reason.
Yes, but that's only when we're communicating to each other. In my brain, I could be using other stuff.
Well, yeah, but communication is like human conversation is a way to get to the truth. Essentially, you examine your arguments through.
Is it? There are a lot of philosophers that will disagree with you.
In what way? Let's have a look at that.
Because like Wittgenstein, like language is limited. He says, you know what, that's not what happens. I really like even Heidegger. The guy writes like almost ununderstandably because really complex ideas are quite hard to express in language. And not only that, but you also have the moment where you internalize the ideas. Not only do you have to understand them through your reason, but to really adopt them in your lifestyle, you need to internalize them and believe in them intuitively, irrationally. And that's where Stoicism, like, that's what happened to me in Stoicism. It's kind of, I believed in Stoicism irrationally almost. I was like, this system has no flaws. It works in all scenarios. And that's how it helped me, like I would say, oh. But honestly, truly, everything that can be communicated in words has flaws. And maybe that could be an irrational belief for me, but it's a lot easier to prove that than to prove that there is objective truth and that can be proved.
With Stoicism, for example, you said in the beginning you believed kind of all of it, and you were like, oh, this is a universal. So in a sense, what you were saying is this is something objective, this is something true. And then as you went into depth, when you examined, oh, is this really the case? Or why is this the truth? You found that it had a couple of holes here and there. So it's not perfect, it's not universal, it's not truth. And then your quest then continues. Okay, what is then the case? How do I fill up those holes? Or is another approach better? And all of that, I think, is through logic and reason and striving for the truth. I guess here we're kind of going off topic because I'm trying to defend the Enlightenment ideals, and you're trying to go.
I genuinely think we're never going to solve this. We are never going to solve this because we're both super disagreeable. Like, we can't just say, okay, I think we've been going for at this for like 10 minutes now. Let's get back.
If you have the attitude of being able to open your mind, really examine your thoughts, which can be scary, or your beliefs rather, to examine your beliefs, which can be scary. If you have that attitude, you will change, and change is beneficial for the most part.
But I think that's my main reason with that's my main problem with reason is once you ground yourself in something like that, you kind of take away your moral responsibility. And I think that believing in reason unexplicably almost is kind of exactly that. It's like believing in God. In Christianity, is God. It's just more useful because you can make sense of it, and you can do science with it and stuff like that, and you can communicate these abstract ideas and stuff like that, apparently.
So what do you think is a third approach? So if one approach is the religious one, which I think both of you and me are, let's say beyond that, I think it's a more primitive approach in some sense. And then the second
Let's
approach...
ask Kierkegaard.
The second approach is reason and science and all of these modern ideas. And then, okay, both of them don't work. Then what is left for us? Is that where the feeling of existentialism comes from?
Yeah, I genuinely think that Enlightenment kind of... So before Enlightenment, it was the Christianity stuff. They saw, oh, this doesn't really work. Then Enlightenment, complete reason. Then Nietzsche and Kierkegaard came around and said, well, this doesn't really work either. And then they started looking into ways of combining the two. And I think the reason is useful up to a point, and then you just have to take the subjective into your own hands and kind of take your own life into your own hands and be like, what, I'm not going to make a system out of this. I'm completely free. I'm going to live this life according to my own values, kind of. But
I remember we were talking once about existentialism, and I wrote to you, I was getting a feel for it and watching lectures, reading books, and I told you, I think existentialism sets out problems through its own philosophy that it cannot solve. So in a sense, it says, oh, look at all these problems, it kind of creates them through the thought like of Sartre and Camus and so on. And then there's no solution. It says the solution doesn't even exist. So you're just left there with this problem, which is the existential threat, existential feeling of what do I do now. You can describe it also as a feeling of nausea with the world. So relating it to
powerlessness.
Sartre's work.
Almost powerlessness.
Also, I think of it more as a disorienting experience. You are confused by the world. You have no ground. Everything is not only meaningless, but it's absurd. You're like, what is going on here? There's reality doesn't have a ground. And what I'm referring to here is this feeling of, okay, now we're stuck. This is the problem. And the philosophy is telling me there's no solution. There's no out of here. I'm stuck in here. What I want to ask you is, first, do you agree with this? And then how does an existentialist deal with that? How would one deal with that?
I think that's precisely what it means to take responsibility. You know, in the face of adversity, that's the ultimate adversity. You have to accept the world is meaningless. It's completely chaotic. There is no question to the ultimate. There is no answer to the ultimate questions, and it really depends on how strong your character is. That's where the moral heroism that we talked about really comes into play. Can you really exist in this completely meaningless world and still live a valuable life? Well, valuable is kind of subjective, but like a life worth living, something that you're proud of and you don't regret. And I think that's how I explain it, but that's still imperfect. And that's where it comes, because any question, any answer that you give to this question is not going to be the right one. And I think that's why they say there is no ultimate answer, because there are thousands of answers, almost as if every person can give an answer to this question. And I think that's perfect, because that's what philosophy should be. It is something for everybody. It is something that everybody should be able to understand and kind of think about their life in this critical way.
Yeah, I think the more you indulge in philosophy, the more you understand there's no right philosophy. I mean, why there's so many different schools of thought in the first place? Well, it's because it's not objective. You can't say that romanticism is complete bogus and the Enlightenment ideal is what we should be striving for example. My problem is okay, then if everyone's entitled to their own opinion, then how do you determine which opinions are more valuable? Or do you just say they're all equal? Do you just say all ideas are the same?
They're all equal.
That sounds to me like a bit of a like Jacques Derrida deconstructionist idea, kind of breaking down every system of every attempt to make sense of this world, is saying, oh no, it's all subjective.
I think I understand what you mean. I think they're all equal in their own sense, but when you put them in a framework of society, there are more useful ones than others.
And also one layer above that, so society, okay, that's a bit of a social dynamic, but what about objective reality? So now going into the realm of physics, ideas such as if I jump, I'm gonna float, don't really work because you always fall down.
That's not really. Well, I'm not saying that you should be creating a system out of this thing. So that's precisely what they're not trying to do. It's kind of like, if I don't believe in reason, I shouldn't be making a system out of it.
Well, I think a lot of those philosophers, what they're trying to do is give ultimate answers to the ultimate questions of reality. So, for example, Hegel tried to do that with history. So just answer the question.
Yeah, but that's enlightenment.
What is history? Well,
It's not existentialism.
I think the philosophers such as Sartre or Camus also have answers to the questions that they set, right? That's what their work, their philosophical work is about. So they also provide some answers. Or
I don't think so. I think they kind of almost...
You think they leave them open?
Yeah, I genuinely think most existentialists kind of put forward questions that can't be answered, like you said. It is precisely what you said. I think it's they use words in a very, very weird way, man. It's quite complicated. But it's not as straightforward as, let's say, ancient Greek philosophy. Ancient Greek philosophy is really easy to understand. These guys, it's really hard to understand them.
Well, I think I look at it more in the sense of when you read someone like Camus or when you read someone like Sartre, I look at it in the sense of let me try and understand how this person felt first and foremost. So in some way, when he sat down and wrote, what was in his mind? What was his mental state like? What was his life
Camus
like?
is really good at that. He
in that way, I don't see it as an answer to the problem of life, to some question, some ultimate question. I see it as what did this person want to express through his writing? What kind of ideas, what kind of feeling did he have? Not really getting into.
So you're putting them into the romanticism kind of framework. It's almost as if you start from the intense feeling that this person had, and because of that intense feeling, he thought about the world in this way.
Yeah.
And that is why he made this philosophy this way, because he felt the nostalgia of absurdity, because he felt super existentialist, and he was like, what is everything? Can I really trust this? I don't really see how this works and stuff like that. And they had, because of their emotional
state, that's how they produce their work. Yeah, I think so.
So you think these kind of philosophical works are based in emotion rather than reason? Or
yeah, to some extent. I think a lot of it, a lot of the nuances is emotional, and then that's why I think we need a system to test those ideas. For example, using again science as an example, you can't just spit out thoughts about reality and say, I think this. There needs to be a system to say whether that's true or not.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think that's completely
reasonable.
That's completely reasonable. I genuinely think I think it is the evolution of Enlightenment and Romanticism together. Yeah, they get the intense feeling, the intense emotion that romanticists have. You know, Kierkegaard, he felt this deep anguish, deep depression, and he felt it really hard. And he made like this movement. He said, fuck reason, I'm not about that shit. And then existentialists came, and they also felt that much stronger about stuff. They felt intense anguish and stuff like that. But they also said, no, we're not going to reject these very reasonable philosophers. And we're going to try to combine our intense nostalgia, our intense feeling of absurdity and existentialism with these reasonable systems. But we can't do it in a system. They tried to find the balance, and it's really hard to understand them because they're all just talking to themselves, kind of.
Because when you mentioned Kierkegaard, and I was reading a lot about Blaise Pascal's work, which apparently is really similar to Kierkegaard. So Blaise Pascal was a prodigy mathematician, very bright, praised by everyone. And then
the first programming language I learned was Pascal.
How's that related to?
Just side note.
And then he had a religious experience later on in life where he became really neurotic, and he wanted to convert as many people to Christianity as possible. So I think that's an example of something going wrong in a person's life, because you can see how Pascal is really a neurotic and anxious, and is just, I think that kind of philosophy, that kind of feeling that they expressed, there's something wrong with it, as in that there can be a fix to it, you know. And then the same with Kierkegaard. He was a person who experienced existential angst. Now it's referred to. Angst is I think a word that he coined, and
Anguish, angst.
Angst. And then this, what I'm aiming at here is that this feeling is different to what's reasonable and what's logical. It's something that should be overcome, which is an enlightenment idea, I guess.
Yeah, I listened to an audiobook recently that talks about emotions and stuff like that. And this thing that Martin Heidegger, which is arguably, some people say that he's the most important existentialist. But the thing is, this is precisely what I mean. The Descartesian system kind of puts a very dualistic nature of the mind and the heart. Like it's almost as if emotions and rationality are two different things. But Heidegger says, no, these two things are the same. If you are feeling nostalgic, you are going to see the whole world nostalgic. If you're feeling sad, you see everything in a sad way.
It's like a filter.
Yeah, it's precisely like a filter. These two things you can't separate them. They're the same thing. It's the heart mind or whatever. In Chinese, it's the same thing, I think. But the thing is, what I'm trying to say is, you have a really good point, and I think you're getting really close to it. And you say that you completely believe in reason, and that's completely fine. I think I also completely believe in reason as to give us objective, say, truth or whatever, truthful statements. But we also have to kind of say, yes, but we see the whole world through this prism of our own emotions. And these two things cannot be separated.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of topics. We went on a lot of tangents, like a lot here and there, but that's what this podcast is about, right? Just exploring ideas, trying in essence to try and make an essay form of a conversation between us two, and to explore these ideas that we've been reading about, and to share our opinions, and just have a good open conversation about them. And so we've talked a lot about existentialism. Anything that you want to bring up lastly? No, go away, man.
No, I still have a lot of stuff that I would like to think about.
Yeah, we can do catch up episode number 2.
Yeah, but honestly, right now I think I have to collect my thoughts, because you've given me some very valuable insight, and I might need to sleep on this and think about it a little bit more, and precisely see where I stand in this reason versus intuition versus balance between the two things, and how it falls into place with the whole world. Because your points make a lot of sense, truly. You saying, well, reason is the only thing we have, we can't really trust anything else. I can see how that's true, and I need to probably reconsider what I completely think about stuff, and see if my beliefs are also not based in anything but blind hope and stuff like that.
I'm glad I managed to bring some ideas onto the table, and I've really enjoyed this conversation as well. So I think it was a great experience.
Good stuff.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you very much for listening. Thanks very much for watching, and see you again in the next episode. Bye-bye.
See ya.
See ya later.
Yeah, existentialism, it's a great movement. It's more contemporary than fuck this. Let's start over. Start over.
All right, say 3, 2, 1.